Sanbonan Dumlang, hello, it's Simply Spissa here, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast Simply Do the Work. And so, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, at this point, I've kind of lost track of which episode is gonna come out when, where, how, because just schoolwork has been hectic. Even just on YouTube, just figuring out like what I want to do there is also just something, because it's just not gonna get into that. But anyways, I want to thank you for joining me for this episode today, and if you're not yet subscribed to the podcast, please do subscribe, follow, and share the podcast. And so I believe it was episode 21 where I spoke about reconciling my faith and sexuality, and I did sort of hint at, there's also been this journey of feeling exiled from the church. And I feel like for today's episode, I kind of want to get into that. And so another thing I do just want to say is this is something which I feel like I've danced around this topic quite a bit, but the reason why I was always like hesitant to talk about it, because it was always still like a sore spot for me, and also really didn't know how I felt. And this is basically where I'm at right now. I mean, my views and thoughts are subject to change. I just want to say that. And I'll be speaking a lot about my personal experience and how that has really shaped my views on the church as an institution. So when I say church, I'm referring to the church as a whole institution. I'm not necessarily speaking to a specific denomination, though also at the same time I recognize that most of my experiences are from the evangelical church, right? And so what actually inspired me to actually record this episode now is I'm currently back at home because of the lockdown and clinicals being suspended. I'm currently back at home, and when I'm at home, I find myself having to engage a lot more in church activities, like watching church services and having conversations about church with my family, because they're still very much involved in the church. And so that is really what made me really question myself about this topic. And I think like the last few episodes have really been on the whole like faith and spirituality trip, because that's pretty much where I'm at right now in my life. And so what I do want to say is I did have a good time in church, right? Like my experiences, I have good positive experiences, and it really was a helpful place for me. I really did find meaning there. I really enjoyed it, felt like I belonged, and I think I have said this in previous episodes, but it was good until it wasn't, basically, is what I'm trying to get at. And so I knew that the church that I went to wasn't affirming, right? But because it was a fun place and everyone was friendly and every weekly service was like a party that kickstarted my week, I still, I stayed. I tolerated, even though there were issues that I noticed. And I think what contrasts my last 2 years of church and the rest of my life, or the previous years of my life, is that I chose to be there. Growing up, I didn't have a choice about whether or not I'm going to church. It was that thing of, if you're under this roof, you go into church. And there were times when it was a drag, but for the most part I actually enjoyed being at church. I was one of those kids who actually loved being at church. I was always active. I was in leadership positions and volunteering since I was 10 years old, as far back as I can remember. And those experiences growing up in church and trying to navigate my faith as an adult right now is what really shaped my decision to leave. So most of us are aware of the church's racist and queerphobic history. But I don't just know the history, I've experienced these things firsthand. When I was around 12 or 13, my family changed churches from the Black Baptist church that was Elokshin to the white Pentecostal church that was in the suburbs. And now we had been attending the Baptist church for about 3 years, but the challenge was it was kind of far from where we stay. And so what happened was, if my parents were away for whatever reason, it would be a struggle to get to church. And my mom didn't want Guti, when she's gone now, we can't go to church. So then we changed churches to the white church because of the proximity to where we stay. It's so close that we could even walk. And so when we entered that church, I think I did mention it was a Pentecostal church, and we were the only black people there at the time. I don't think I'm even exaggerating. We're probably the first black family to congregate at the church, and that was about 2013, around there. And so I struggled to make friends when we were there because everyone had their cliques from school, and I was like the only person who came from a black school, and I was like also the only person who didn't speak Afrikaans, because it was white and Afrikaans. And so the racial dynamics were not cute, and just dealing with that mess during my formative years definitely did a number on me. Like, I remember one specific incident when there was like a youth group, like a youth event, right, a youth bash, and they were inviting many different churches. And I remember they even said they organized buses to fetch people from certain churches in the townships. And so obviously the people from the townships are black, right? And they were like to me, like, oh yeah, so you're gonna be at the welcome table to help welcome these people who come from the townships, in case some of them don't know English, which, looking back, was so messed up. Like, first of all, they just assumed that that people won't know English, won't be able to communicate. Also, I wasn't given, like, I feel like everyone else on that team, they could choose where they want to volunteer, but I was told that, hey, listen, you're the only black person here, so you're going to be there at the welcome committee. It's like both of them to assume that I'd be able to communicate, because also I'm Zulu. I'm not very fluent in Sotho, and where we stay, it's like a predominantly Sotho area, so there was no way I can be speaking Sotho to these people. But at the time, I think I was about 15 years old. While I did feel some type of a way, there was really no way for me to communicate that or express how I was uncomfortable with that. I just went with the flow, and that's just one of many racist or like microaggression, whatever you want to call it, incidences at that church. But it didn't just stop there. And I think the thing that did make me finally stop was like the homophobia, especially the following year when I was like 16, and that's when I really started like confronting my sexuality. So I remember this one specific night. We were in the church chapel. I remember it was like, it was the Thursday, I think it was the Thursday evening for youth group, right? So what they did that night is they split it. They said, okay, the boys are going to the chapel, and for me, the girls will stay in the hall. So we were there in the chapel. First of all, I didn't like that it was gendered. I didn't like they were separated by gender. That's something that always used to bother me as a kid, right? Even in school, how things would be so gendered. And so already there, right, something I don't like. And I remember they gave us all little pieces of paper and said that we should write down like questions, and the pastor's gonna answer them. And I remember in my heart, the question I had was, is it okay to be gay? That is the question I had, but I didn't have the guts to ask it. But clearly I wasn't the only person who had that question, because someone did ask that question. And I'll never forget how the pastor just stood there. He opened the question, read out loud, said, no, it's a sin, closed the question, and moved on. That was that. He didn't elaborate further. I mean, which I can say thank God. But still, it's just the dismissive nature of it that really struck me. That really, wow, not me getting emotional while thinking about it now. But it really did have an impact on me, especially considering how with the other questions, he attended them with so much love. I remember my first thought was like, oh, okay, cool, so it's a sin, I'm cured, ha ha ha. No, not the case. And so I kind of stopped going, and I remember just using school as an excuse to when my parents said, I'm like, oh no, I have these assignments, which wasn't a lie, like honestly. Plus that year was just, it was a lot for me, like that year was a lot. So this isn't a sob fest, I'm not gonna get into that. But I think I have spoken in a previous episode, I'm not sure which one, about how there was a period where I didn't have a church until I eventually found Hillsong. But then, I realized that actually Hillsong is not as affirming as they'd like you to believe. It's very much come as you are, right? That's the message. But if you want to be in leadership, if you want to be on the stage, if you're queer, that's not going to do it, right? It's very much, I think they do recognize how it would be a bad marketing move for them to be upfront with how conservative they actually are. And so that is, a run through of my story, and it might be asking, okay, I hear all that, but why did you leave? And these are kind of my reasons. And I was hoping just to start with my story, sort of give us my point of view, and also recognize that my story is one of many, and not only have I been processing the trauma of my experience, but as mentioned in previous episodes, the issues go beyond my personal story, right? I also recognize that my story is like, my experience isn't necessarily the worst, right? I know people have experienced worse, they've experienced much more violence, and I think another thing that motivated me to leave was I had to leave before it got worse, before the violence I experienced got worse. And so I've listed down, I think, like 5 reasons here why I left the church. And so first, that I realized that church institutions, many of them are complacent to racism and uphold white supremacy. I think I do have a podcast episode from last year where I talk about how the church's silence with regards to Black Lives Matter is very loud and very deafening, right? It was literally, I'm not just talking internationally, but even like in South Africa specifically, it was very few churches, right? Obviously, right, the Black people, it's like you'd expect them to speak up against injustice against their people, but like the white pastors were silent. Even pastors of so-called multiracial churches, they weren't stepping up, or if they were saying atrocious things. Like I can't remember which pastor this was, but some pastor I remember trying to reframe white privilege as a white blessing, and I was just like, it's because of the history, like the racist history of the church could literally be its own video, so I'm not going to go into too much of that. But I think if you do want to know about that, I'm currently listening to The Origins, Stamped from the Beginning, The Origins of Racist Ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi, and it's a long book, not gonna lie, but in that book, that's where I learned about how there's a lot of terminology that's used by Christians and in the church that actually has racist origins. I'm not going to get into that because I'll go on a whole entire tangent. But then secondly is the queerphobia. As I mentioned, right, in youth group they used to split things according to gender, which for me, being non-binary, that would cause a lot of discomfort, because it's like, why am I being forced to be with these boys? Why? Or even I remember like having like, when I had friends who were girls, like when I'd be separated, I find like, okay, now I have no friends. And it's just, there's that aspect, and even the whole aspect of how everything is so heteronormative in the church. I've noticed that, especially like with like when I was at Hillsong, I noticed something a lot, that if they're gonna have a talk on sexuality, it's almost like they would intentionally avoid like talking about gay, bi, like relationships outside of heterosexuality. It's like they would always dance around and making sure they do not get that. But sometimes, sorry about that, but sometimes you could get like, it's like they try to say what they try to say without saying it blatantly. But like if you're sitting there and you're part of the community, that okay, this is kind of directed at me, or you realize that this is not a safe space. Like I remember my body used to physically react, like when it was time to go to church, I would physically get anxious. And me at that time being so like fired up for Jesus, as they say, I was like, oh no, devil be gone, the devil's trying to keep me away from going to church. Until I think it was last year, no, it had to be the year before. This pandemic has kind of warped my concept of time, but I think, it was 2019 when I started being introduced to the idea of religious trauma and how our bodies physically react to spaces where it doesn't recognize it's safe. And so probably, that anxiety I was feeling was my body's reaction to, oh no, we're going to that place. I think my body knew around like 4:30, because I used to attend the 5 o'clock service. My body was like, oh no, we're going back to that place. And so my body was literally in fight or flight mode, and I was like ignoring that part of my body, or like trying to, what is the term they like Christianity, they like say you need to put your body in submission. There's this very much villainizing of the body, of the flesh. But I've started to listen to my body and recognize that is not a safe space for someone who's queer like me. And so my third reason is I realized that my attendance and the money that they got from me was kind of incentivizing them to keep doing what they're doing. Like, why would they stop if I'm still there every week serving, right? Because I used to serve. If I'm still there every week giving them money and growing their vision, as they so like to say. And so in my mind, I sort of frame it in a way as kind of like a protest, in a way, kind of like how you boycott brands and celebrities who don't agree with your ideals. And that's kind of why I'm like, I'm not gonna go to that place, because me doing there, which this guy ties in with reason number 4, right, which I couldn't be part of a system that was hurting people just because they were nice to me, right? My presence was also showing complacency to the issues that I already mentioned before, right? It's kind of like it's the same as with racism or any other issue, right? Just because you don't experience it doesn't mean others, doesn't make it okay for you to turn a blind eye, right? Like there are black people who, because they've never experienced racism, or they've never experienced violence because of their race, they end up supporting and endorsing racist people. And I realized that actually can't fix this place from the inside out, right? It's like a seat at the table politics is just not, it's not the way, right? It's better if I leave for not only myself but also for the community at large. That felt like a very important step. And I'm sure, obviously, if you think about it, like Hillsong Church, for example, it's a global mega church. Like my absence is not really like, they're probably not gonna notice, but if more and more people are empowered, and that's also why I think this is where the call for allies come in, right? Allies also need to start leaving the churches, or if you're in there, be loud and make them uncomfortable to continue with their bigotry, whether it is racism or whether it is homophobia or whatever the case might be. And finally, the last reason why I left is that I found that I no longer believed in a lot of the evangelical Christian theology. To be honest, if I'm being honest, like right now, when it comes to my faith, I feel like I'm in an agnostic point in terms of I'm still like I still say I'm a Christian, I still believe in certain Christian ideals and stuff, but I'm in a very much agnostic space. I sometimes question, do I believe this because it's what I believe to be true, or because it's what I've only known, right? I feel like if I was raised in a different household who had a different belief or religion, I'd probably believe that to be true. So I'm kind of in a state of questioning, which would have been really scary to admit if I was still inside the church. I feel like when you're in the church, it's almost this call to conform to that church's beliefs and ideals, right? I feel like it's almost like if you're there, you need to believe the same things, you need to pray the same prayers. It's a lot for me. If you've been part of a church tradition, you know what I mean. And so where I'm at right now, so like I mentioned, right, when I'm at home, I participate with church and stuff. It's kind of like a respect thing, I'm kind of being respectful to my parents, and also I look at the harm, right? The church isn't all bad, right? And so just sometimes, and there is certainly good in it. Even like I said, when I was in it, I saw some good. And even now when I'm outside, I'm not gonna act obtuse and deny that there is some good. But now I do engage with it from a distance. And I have tried to have conversations with my parents before regarding these issues and how I feel, and it didn't go too well. So I feel like right now we kind of not gonna go there. But I have made a promise to myself that at next time, if something or someone says something that offends me, I will speak up, because I think the problem was in the past I would just internalize it, feel bad, and just it's kind of like the cycle would continue, right? So far it's been good, it's been chill, but if a pastor says something homophobic, I'm not just gonna sit there and just accept it. Gone are those days. And so my overall message is, if you find yourself in an unaffirming church and you can leave, if you can, I'd suggest you leave. There's no point in staying. And I'm gonna need allies to also leave their racist, sexist, homophobic churches. Let them go. I think we definitely can't change the church from the inside out, and if you want to see change, then we have to hit them financially, right? If the funds start dropping, if attendance starts dropping, I believe that more than or let me say, I believe that is a key part. Let me not say more than that, but that is a key part in getting churches to change, right? It's not just having biblical debates and all that, because you can debate back and forth. It doesn't really benefit anyone, but especially if you're on the side of the marginalized, it just causes you a lot more heartache. It really does number on your mental health. It's hence I said, if you can leave, even though like me personally, and this is just my opinion, I don't really care for church reformation. That's not, like, at some point that was something that I was very much passionate about. That's what I thought I was called to do, because I want out of that institution. But just because I don't want to be in that institution doesn't mean, what I'm trying to say is just, I don't want to be in that institution. But for people who do want to go to church, I do want church to at least be a safe space for them, right? I do think that people should have the option to know that, hey, if I want to go to church, I can go to this church and I know that I'll be safe in this space. That is what I want, right? And like I said, my opinions and views might change, but this is currently where I'm at. And so hopefully that made sense. You guys were able to follow and you enjoy this episode. Please do feel free to reach out to me at Simply Sfiso on Instagram and Twitter, though I feel like Instagram is where I'm most active. And so yeah, I'd love to also hear your thoughts on this topic. If you're still in a church, or if you've never been in church, like, just overall, let me know what you think. And yeah, until I hear from you guys, or you hear from me in the next one, I love you so much. Bye guys.